I sat at the head of the conference table, the Dublin skyline stretching behind me through floor-to-ceiling windows. 49 floors up. The view was breathtaking, but no one was looking outside. All eyes were fixed on me, or more precisely, on the numbers I just presented. $210 million. A figure that would change everything for Meridian Core Technologies, and for me, Natalie Hayes, International Strategy Director. These projections are... Klaus Weber, Haven Logistics' silver-haired CEO, paused as he studied the tablet in front of him. His German accent thickened when he was impressed. Ambitious, Ms. Hayes. I smiled, maintaining eye contact. Ambitious but achievable, Herr Weber. Und Sie wissen, dass ich keine Zeit für Luftschlösser habe. And you know I have no time for castles in the air. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. 9 months of relationship building had taught me that Klaus respected directness in his native tongue far more than polite English platitudes. This merger between our American tech giant and the conservative European transport conglomerate represented more than just another acquisition. It was the cornerstone of Meridian's expansion strategy, my strategy. And today's meeting was the culmination of thousands of hours of work across 3 continents. I appreciate your candor, as always. Klaus replied, switching to German. It's refreshing in international business. I nodded, feeling the familiar calm that came with navigating these waters. At 38, I'd spent the last decade becoming Meridian's cross-cultural negotiation specialist. I knew when to push, when to yield, and most importantly, when to speak the right language, literally and figuratively. The Dublin office had been chosen strategically for these negotiations, neutral territory for both companies, with Meridian's European headquarters providing the perfect backdrop of success without the intimidation factor of our New York base. The conference room had been arranged precisely to my specifications, the lighting warm but professional, refreshments that nodded to both American and European tastes, and seating that placed key decision-makers in my line of sight. If we can turn to Section 4, I continued, guiding the room of 14 executives through the implementation timeline. This addresses your concerns about operational autonomy during the transition period. This was the delicate part. Haven Logistics prided itself on its century-old European operations. They needed reassurance that Meridian wouldn't simply steamroll their established processes. My strategy had always been clear: promise them autonomy where it mattered, integrate where it made financial sense, and ensure the German-speaking leadership felt their heritage was respected throughout. I was midway through explaining the phased integration approach when the conference room door swung open. Caleb Foster strode in with the confidence of someone who owned the building, which, as Meridian's newly appointed Executive Vice President of Business Development, he nearly did. Tall, impeccably dressed, and 15 minutes late. He didn't bother with apologies. Sorry to interrupt, he said, contradicting himself immediately. Traffic from the airport was brutal. He flashed a smile at the room while his assistant scrambled to set up his materials. I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse quickened. Caleb wasn't scheduled to join until tomorrow's session. His early arrival could only mean one thing. He wanted to make his presence felt. Caleb, I acknowledged with a professional nod. We were just discussing the operational autonomy provisions. Would you like me to brief you privately after this session, or shall I recap now? It was a calculated move, giving him the choice while subtly reminding everyone that this was my meeting, my deal. No need, Natalie. I've been fully briefed on the proposal. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Please, continue. I turned back to the Haven executives. As I was saying, the transition team would be jointly staffed, with Haven maintaining operational control of ground logistics throughout Europe for the first 18 months post-merger. Actually, Caleb cut in, I think we should revisit that timeline. 18 months seems excessive for full integration. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I saw Klaus Weber's eyebrows rise slightly, a tell I'd learned to recognize. The Haven team exchanged glances. The 18-month timeline was established after extensive consultation with Haven's regional managers, I explained, keeping my voice even. It allows for seasonal variations in their business cycle and accounts for the regulatory approvals needed in 7 different countries. Caleb leaned forward. I understand that. But our shareholders are expecting synergies to materialize more quickly. I'm thinking 9 months, 12 at the outside. I could see the immediate effect of his words. Haven's CFO, Bridget Muller, stiffened. Klaus's expression hardened. 9 months of careful relationship building was unraveling before my eyes. Vielleicht sollten wir eine kurze Pause machen, I suggested in German, offering a short break to reset the conversation. Klaus nodded gratefully, and I stood to escort the Haven team to the refreshment area we'd set up nearby, hoping to contain the damage. I didn't realize you spoke German, Caleb remarked as I passed his chair. There's a lot about this deal you don't know yet, I replied quietly. Which is why we should align before making substantive changes to the proposal. I don't need German to understand numbers, Natalie, he said, his voice carrying just enough for others to hear. And the numbers say we're giving away too much control for too long. I spent the next 15 minutes in rapid-fire German, reassuring Klaus and his team that Caleb's suggestion was merely that, a suggestion, and that Meridian remained committed to the original terms. But the damage was done. The trust I'd built had been shaken. When we reconvened, I steered the conversation toward less contentious aspects of the deal, hoping to rebuild momentum. Caleb, to my relief, remained mostly silent, studying the materials and occasionally typing notes on his tablet. As the session wrapped up for the day, Klaus approached me while his team gathered their belongings. Natalie, he said in German, we value the relationship we've built with you. But I must ask, is Mr. Foster's perspective representative of Meridian's current thinking? Because if the operational timeline is now in question, it is not, I assured him. The proposal as presented reflects our official position. I'll make sure we're aligned internally before tomorrow's session. He nodded, not entirely convinced. Good. Because Haven is not interested in becoming merely another American acquisition that loses its identity. You understood this from the beginning. I still do, I replied. After the Haven team departed, I turned to Caleb, who was chatting with 2 Meridian executives. We need to talk, I said, not bothering to hide my frustration now that we were among colleagues. Privately, he checked his watch. I have a call in 5 minutes. Can we catch up over dinner, the hotel restaurant at 8? This can't wait until dinner, I insisted. You undermined 9 months of strategy in 5 minutes. His expression hardened slightly, the affable exterior slipping. I didn't undermine anything. Natalie. I brought reality into the room. 18 months of operational independence is a non-starter for the board. The board approved this strategy, I reminded him. Davis signed off on it personally. Things change. Davis wants results faster now. He gathered his things. 8 o'clock. We'll sort it out. I watched him leave, a knot forming in my stomach. Caleb had been at Meridian for just 3 months, recruited from a competitor with much fanfare and a compensation package that had raised eyebrows throughout the industry. His mandate, ostensibly, was to accelerate Meridian's European expansion, my territory for the past 5 years. At dinner, Caleb was all charm, ordering an expensive bottle of wine and asking about my background with Haven. I explained the relationship-building process, the cultural nuances of dealing with a company like Haven, and why the 18-month operational timeline was non-negotiable if we wanted the deal to succeed. I get it, he said, swirling his wine. You've put a lot of work into this, and you understand these people. It's not just about understanding them, I clarified. It's about respecting their concerns. Haven isn't desperate to be acquired. They're profitable, stable, and proud of their heritage. We need them more than they need us. No one's irreplaceable in business. Natalie, he said, his tone suddenly philosophical. Not Haven, not Meridian. He looked directly at me. Not any of us. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. The message was clear. We're going to revise the proposal for tomorrow, he continued, businesslike again. 12-month transition. with joint operational control after the first 6. It's still generous. They'll walk, I warned. They won't. His confidence was absolute. No one walks away from a deal this size over a few months of control. If they threaten to, it's a negotiating tactic. You don't understand European business culture. I understand business, period. He cut me off. And I understand that Davis and the board are looking for someone who can close deals quickly, not coddle potential acquisitions for the better part of a year. I realized then that this wasn't about the Haven deal at all. This was Caleb positioning himself, using my project as a stepping stone. The realization must have shown on my face. Look, he said, his tone softening artificially. You've done the groundwork. That's valuable. But sometimes a fresh perspective is needed to get across the finish line. We're on the same team here. I'd heard that particular lie too many times in my career to be fooled. I'll have the revisions ready for your review by 7 tomorrow morning, I said, knowing when to strategically retreat. Perfect. He signaled for the check. Oh, and I'll be taking lead in tomorrow's session. Davis wants me to get more face time with the Haven leadership. And there it was, the real play. I nodded, keeping my expression professionally blank while my mind raced through implications and options. Back in my hotel room, I didn't work on revisions. Instead, I called my most trusted contact at Meridian's legal department, Sophie Chen. He's making a move, I told her after explaining the situation. And I need to know if it's just Caleb being opportunistic or if there's a larger play happening. Sophie was silent for a moment. There are rumors, she finally said. Nothing concrete, but there's talk about a restructuring of the International Strategy Division after this quarter. Davis promised me autonomy on European acquisitions through next year. I reminded her. Davis isn't the only voice in the room anymore. Sophie replied carefully. The new board members from the Tucker Media Investment. They're pushing for faster returns. I thanked her and ended the call, then sat in the dark of my hotel room, looking out at Dublin's twinkling lights. So this was how it would end, not with recognition for years of building Meridian's European presence, but with a splashy new hire taking credit for the culmination of my work. Unless I didn't let it end that way. I opened my laptop and began to work, not on Caleb's revisions, but on a contingency plan that had been forming in the back of my mind for longer than I cared to admit. The second day of negotiations started with Caleb front and center. I took a seat to the side, watching as he presented the revised proposal with all the confidence of someone who hadn't just torched months of careful diplomacy. Klaus Weber's face remained impassive, but I could read the micro-expressions, the slight tightening around his eyes, the minimal narrowing of his gaze. The Haven team listened politely as Caleb explained the optimized integration timeline and accelerated synergy realization. When he finished, Klaus thanked him calmly and then turned to me. Ms. Hayes, you're uncharacteristically quiet this morning. Do you support this revised approach? Before I could answer, Caleb smoothly interjected. Natalie has been instrumental in getting us to this point, but going forward, I'll be leading Meridian's side of this integration, part of our own internal restructuring to ensure you get our top-tier attention. The Haven executives exchanged glances. I maintained my professional composure while absorbing the shock. Not tomorrow, not next week, but right now, Caleb was pushing me out of the deal in the middle of negotiations. I see, Klaus said carefully. This is unexpected. Business moves quickly these days. Caleb replied with a practiced smile. We find it's best to have leadership continuity from negotiation through integration. I could see the Haven team's trust evaporating. They'd spent months dealing with me, establishing rapport, working through cultural and operational differences. Now they were being told to start fresh with someone who didn't speak their language, literally or figuratively. Perhaps, Klaus suggested, we should take a short recess to consider these new developments. Of course, Caleb agreed, missing the warning signs I could read clearly. As the Haven team filed out for their private discussion, Caleb turned to me, keeping his voice low. I know this is a surprise, but it's for the best. You'll be transitioned to other projects where your methodical approach is better suited. You mean fired, I stated flatly. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. Reassigned. The details will be worked out after we close this deal. If you close this deal, I corrected him. His expression hardened. I always close my deals, Natalie. What Caleb didn't know, what no one at Meridian knew, was that I'd seen this coming 2 months ago. Not the specific timing or the public humiliation, but the eventual push to sideline me. The signs had been there. The gradual exclusion from strategic planning sessions, the pointed questions about my deliberate approach to acquisition targets, the sudden interest from HR in documenting my processes for knowledge transfer purposes. While Caleb was busy impressing the board with promises of accelerated growth, I had been quietly preparing my exit strategy. I excused myself and walked to the ladies' room, where I sent a single text message, proceeding with Nightingale. Then I returned to the conference room, took my seat, and waited. 40 minutes later, the Haven team returned. Klaus didn't bother sitting down. Mr. Foster, he began formally. We appreciate Meridian's interest in Haven logistics. However, in light of these unexpected changes, we believe it would be prudent to pause our discussions and reassess whether this partnership aligns with our long-term vision. Caleb's confident smile faltered. I understand your concern about the transition, but I assure you, it is not merely about transition. Klaus interrupted. It is about trust and understanding. We have spent months establishing a relationship based on mutual respect and cultural alignment. These changes suggest a fundamental shift in approach that gives us pause. Caleb shot me an accusatory glance, as if I'd somehow engineered this reaction. In truth, I hadn't needed to say a word. The Haven leadership were traditional European business people who valued relationships over transactions. Caleb had demonstrated in less than 24 hours that he didn't understand this basic fact. Perhaps, I suggested, speaking for the first time since being sidelined, I could have a brief conversation with the Haven team to address any concerns, given our established relationship. Caleb hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to maintain control and the urgent need to salvage the situation. Fine, he finally agreed. But the revised terms stand. I nodded and followed the Haven team to the smaller conference room they'd been using. Once the door closed, Klaus turned to me. Natalie, what is happening? Yesterday we were finalizing a carefully constructed agreement, and today there is a new leader with new terms who does not understand our business. Politics, I said simply, switching to German. Meridian is changing, Klaus, and unfortunately, the direction it's taking no longer aligns with the promises I made to you. So we walk away. Brigitte, the CFO, stated firmly. That is one option, I agreed. But I'd like to propose an alternative. I removed a slim folder from my portfolio case and placed it on the table. I've anticipated this situation, not the specific timing, but the eventuality. 2 months ago, I established a new entity, NH Global Advisors, registered in the Netherlands. Klaus raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we work with your consultancy instead? I'm suggesting we finish what we started, I clarified. The merger still makes financial sense for both Haven and Meridian, but the implementation needs a trusted intermediary who understands both cultures. And Meridian would agree to this arrangement? Brigitte asked skeptically. They would have little choice if Haven makes it a condition of the deal, I pointed out. The board wants this acquisition too badly to walk away over who manages the integration. Klaus studied me thoughtfully. This feels like dangerous territory. Natalie. Business is always dangerous territory, I replied. But I've been careful. There's no non-compete in my Meridian contract that would prevent this arrangement. I've verified this with external counsel. The Haven executives exchanged glances, having a silent conversation through subtle expressions that only long-term colleagues can manage. We would need to discuss this privately, Klaus finally said. Of course. But first, a proposal. Tell Caleb you need more time to consider Meridian's revised offer. Request a 48-hour pause. That gives us time to structure this properly, If you're interested. Klaus nodded slowly. And if we're not? Then you walk away, as planned. My suggestion doesn't change your existing options, it only adds a new one. Back in the main conference room, Klaus delivered the message exactly as discussed. Caleb tried to push for continuing the discussions immediately, but the Haven team was firm. They would take 48 hours to consider Meridian's new approach and terms. As the meeting broke up, Caleb pulled me aside, his expression thunderous despite his attempt to maintain a professional demeanor. "What did you say to them?" he demanded. I explained that Meridian remains committed to the acquisition despite the personnel changes. I replied calmly. They're traditional. Caleb. They need time to adjust to new faces and new terms. He studied me suspiciously. If you've undermined this deal, you did that yourself when you changed the terms they'd spent months negotiating, I cut in. I'm trying to salvage what I can. Your role here is done, he said flatly. I'll handle the follow-up with Haven. You should return to New York. Actually, I've scheduled some personal time in Europe. It was approved months ago. This was a lie, but one he couldn't easily verify on short notice. I'll be available by phone if Haven has any transition questions. He clearly wanted to object but couldn't find a reasonable basis to do so. Fine. But remember where your paycheck comes from. Natalie. I never forget who I work for, I assured him. The literal truth, if not the meaning he assumed. Over the next 48 hours, I met with Klaus and his key executives at a small hotel in Dalkey, outside Dublin. We hammered out the details of a new arrangement. Haven would proceed with the Meridian acquisition, but with a critical condition, NH Global Advisors would manage the implementation and cultural integration process, with a substantial success fee tied to performance milestones. Meridian won't like this, Brigitte noted as we reviewed the final terms. Meridian wants this acquisition, I reminded her. More importantly, they want it done quickly. Caleb has promised the board accelerated results, and he can't deliver those if the deal falls apart. And you're comfortable with this arrangement? Klaus asked. Burning bridges with your employer of how many years? 7, I supplied. And yes, I'm comfortable with it. Meridian made their choice when they brought in Caleb to claim credit for my work. I'm simply making mine. On the morning the Haven team was scheduled to respond to Meridian, I received a text from my contact in Meridian's HR department. Termination paperwork being prepared, effective immediately after Haven deal concludes. Severance details still under discussion. So they weren't even waiting for the deal to close before pushing me out. It was almost comically predictable. I arrived at Meridian's Dublin office ahead of the Haven team, finding Caleb and 3 other Meridian executives preparing for the meeting. Caleb seemed surprised to see me. Natalie, I thought you were taking personal time. I wanted to see this through, I replied. One way or another. That won't be necessary. We've got it covered. His dismissal was barely veiled. Haven specifically requested my presence, I said, which was true, though not for the reasons he assumed. He couldn't object without potentially upsetting the Haven team. So he reluctantly nodded toward an open seat, not at the main table, but along the wall with the administrative staff. The message was clear. I was no longer part of the negotiating team. I took the offered seat without comment. When the Haven contingent arrived, more numerous than expected, Caleb greeted them with forced cheer. Welcome back, gentlemen and lady, he added with a nod to Brigitte. We're eager to hear your thoughts on moving forward. Klaus took his time getting settled, arranging his papers with deliberate precision. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Foster. After careful consideration, we are prepared to proceed with the acquisition discussion, with one significant condition. Caleb leaned forward eagerly. We're certainly open to reasonable adjustments. The condition is this. Haven Logistics will only proceed if the integration process is managed by an independent third party with demonstrated expertise in European operations and cultural integration. Caleb blinked, clearly not expecting this. That's an unusual request. Meridian has extensive experience with acquisitions and integrations. Nevertheless, this is our condition, Klaus stated firmly. And we have already identified the appropriate partner. He turned and looked directly at me. NH Global Advisors. The confusion on Caleb's face would have been comical if the stakes weren't so high. He looked from Klaus to me and back again. I'm not familiar with this company. It's a specialized consultancy, Klaus explained, founded by experts in cross-cultural business integration. He didn't elaborate further. Caleb was rapidly connecting the dots. And you're suggesting we hire this consultancy to manage the integration that Meridian is perfectly capable of handling internally? Not suggesting, Klaus corrected. Requiring, as a condition of the acquisition. I'll need to discuss this with our leadership. Caleb stammered, his composure finally cracking. Of course, Klaus agreed. Though I should mention that if this condition is not acceptable, we have received interest from other potential partners. This was a bluff, but a good one. Haven was an attractive acquisition target, and rumors of Meridian's interest would have certainly reached their competitors. Perhaps, I suggested, speaking up from my position along the wall, it would be helpful if Haven and NH Global discuss the proposed arrangement in more detail while Meridian consults with New York. Caleb shot me a venomous look, finally understanding that something had happened during those 48 hours that he hadn't anticipated. Fine, he bit out. We'll take a short recess. As he and the Meridian team filed out, presumably to call New York in a panic, Klaus turned to me with the barest hint of a smile. Shall we begin? For the next hour, the Haven team and I conducted a detailed discussion of the integration plan, essentially the same plan I developed at Meridian, now rebranded under NH Global Advisors. We spoke entirely in German, occasionally loud enough for the Meridian representatives who had remained in the room to hear but not understand. When Caleb returned, his expression was tightly controlled. We've consulted with our leadership team. While this arrangement is unconventional, we're willing to consider it to move the deal forward. However, we would need to review NH Global's qualifications and the specific terms of their involvement. As luck would have it, I said, rising from my seat and approaching the main table. I have that information right here. I handed him a folder containing NH Global's company profile, created just days ago, but backdated to suggest a longer operating history, and a detailed proposal for managing the Haven Meridian integration. He flipped through it, his jaw tightening as he no doubt recognized elements of the strategy I developed while at Meridian. This will require careful review by our legal team. Of course, I agreed pleasantly. Though Haven has already conducted their due diligence and is satisfied with NH Global's capabilities. Klaus nodded in confirmation. We would not make this request without thorough investigation. Caleb was trapped, and he knew it. He could refuse Haven's condition and lose the acquisition entirely. Or he could agree and effectively admit that he needed my expertise to complete the deal he'd tried to steal. I'll need to step out again, he said tightly. While he was gone, I quietly explained to the Haven team what was likely happening. Caleb calling New York in a fury, the board weighing the risks of walking away versus accepting Haven's unusual demand, and ultimately, the financial imperatives winning out. Meridian had been very public about their European expansion strategy, and failing to land Haven would damage their stock price and market credibility. When Caleb returned 30 minutes later, his expression told the story before he spoke. Meridian is prepared to accept Haven's condition, with certain parameters around NH Global's role and compensation. Excellent, Klaus said. Then I believe we can proceed with finalizing the acquisition agreement. NH Global will provide the integration services according to the proposal they've presented. With Meridian's oversight, Caleb added quickly. With mutual oversight from both Haven and Meridian, I corrected gently. As an independent consultant, NH Global serves both parties' interest in ensuring a smooth transition. The rest of the day was spent hammering out the details. By evening, we had a framework agreement that all parties could live with, or at least, that no one was willing to walk away from. Haven would be acquired by Meridian. NH Global would manage the integration process, and I would effectively continue the work I'd been doing all along, but with far greater autonomy and compensation. As the meeting concluded, Caleb pulled me aside, his voice low and furious. "I don't know how you engineered this, but it won't end well for you. Meridian has resources you can't imagine." "I'm well aware of Meridian's resources," I replied calmly. "I've been managing them for 7 years. What you fail to understand, Caleb, is that in your rush to claim credit, you overlooked the relationships that make these deals actually work. Haven trusts me, not Meridian, and certainly not you. Trust doesn't trump contracts," he warned. "Our legal team will be reviewing your employment agreement very carefully." "They're welcome to do so," I said with confidence I genuinely felt. "I've been preparing for this day longer than you've been with the company." The following morning, I received an email from Meridian HR informing me that my employment was being terminated effective immediately for actions contrary to company interests. My building access was revoked, my email shut down, and my final paycheck would be sent after an accounting of company resources. It was exactly what I'd expected and prepared for. What Meridian didn't know was that 6 weeks earlier, after first noticing the signs of my imminent sidelining, I'd consulted with one of Europe's top employment attorneys. Together, we'd carefully reviewed my Meridian contract and found what the company's rush to expand internationally had created significant gaps in their standard employment terms. As an American hired to work primarily in Europe, my contract had been hastily adapted from Meridian's U.S. template. In the process, several key protections for the company had been weakened or omitted entirely. There was no comprehensive non-compete clause that would stand up in European courts. The confidentiality provisions were narrowly defined to cover only technical information, not business relationships or strategies. And most importantly, there was no clause preventing me from providing services to Meridian's clients or acquisition targets after my employment ended. These oversights were now the foundation of NH Global Advisors' legal right to exist. I'd also been careful about timing. I hadn't approached Haven about my new venture until after Caleb had already begun making changes to the acquisition strategy. Changes that hadn't been properly documented or approved through Meridian's own processes. This gave me a credible position that I was acting to save a deal that Caleb was jeopardizing, rather than sabotaging Meridian's interests. When Meridian's cease and desist letter arrived later that day, demanding I terminate all contact with Haven and threatening legal action, I forwarded it directly to my attorney with a simple note. As expected, proceed with response. The response, delivered the following morning, was a masterpiece of legal precision. It outlined the deficiencies in my employment agreement, documented Caleb's unauthorized changes to the acquisition strategy, included statements from Haven executives about their loss of confidence in Meridian following the leadership change, and concluded with a gentle reminder that any legal action would become public, potentially affecting Meridian's stock price during a critical expansion phase. For 48 hours, silence. Then came a terse email from Meridian's general counsel proposing a mutual resolution. Meridian would not contest NH Global's role in the Haven integration if I signed an agreement limiting my future work with other Meridian acquisition targets. I declined. The fact was, I held all the leverage. Haven wouldn't proceed without me. Other Meridian acquisition prospects in Europe had already heard rumors of the situation and were reaching out quietly to learn more. And Meridian's board was facing their quarterly earnings call in 3 weeks, where they'd promised to announce significant European expansion progress. Instead of responding to their proposal, I had my attorney send a draft press release announcing NH Global Advisors' role in facilitating the Haven Meridian integration, framed in entirely positive terms, but making it clear who was actually managing the process. The implied threat was obvious. Fight me. And the story becomes public in a way Meridian can't control. 2 days later, Meridian capitulated. A new agreement arrived, acknowledging NH Global as an approved service provider for the Haven integration with no restrictions on future clients. In return, I agreed not to disparage Meridian publicly, a small concession that cost me nothing. The Haven acquisition closed the following week, with minimal fanfare from Meridian. Understandable, given that they could hardly celebrate the innovative integration approach being led by the executive they'd just fired. Caleb was quoted in the press release claiming credit for structuring a unique transition process that respects Haven's European heritage, a line that made Klaus laugh out loud when I showed it to him. What happened next exceeded even my most optimistic projections. As word spread through European business circles about how the Haven integration was being managed, other companies began reaching out. Some were potential Meridian acquisition targets seeking advice on how to protect their culture during acquisition. Others were competitors interested in how NH Global had established itself so quickly as a player in the M&A advisory space. Within a month, I'd signed agreements with 3 of Haven's logistics partners in Northern Europe, helping them navigate their changing relationship with the newly acquired company. These deals, combined, were worth 3 times what the Haven integration contract had been worth. Meanwhile, Meridian was struggling. Without my relationships and cultural expertise, their European expansion had stalled. 2 promising acquisition targets had gone quiet, waiting to see how the Haven integration proceeded before committing to discussions. Caleb was under increasing pressure to deliver the results he'd promised, but lacked the network and credibility to move quickly in the European market. The final blow came 6 weeks after my departure from Meridian, when a respected financial journal published a detailed analysis of the company's European strategy. The article never mentioned me by name, but described how Meridian had replaced key international leadership at a critical juncture, and was now facing significant challenges in maintaining acquisition momentum. It noted that several European targets were expressing concerns about cultural alignment and questioned whether Meridian understood the European business landscape. The morning the article was published, Meridian's stock dropped 19%. I read the news on my tablet while sitting in my new office in Rotterdam, a modest space befitting a startup consultancy, but with an excellent view of the harbor. My espresso was perfect, the morning sunlight warm on my desk, and my calendar filled with meetings with potential clients who valued expertise, cultural understanding, and relationships over quick wins and corporate politics. Caleb, I later learned, had been placed under internal investigation for his handling of the Haven acquisition and subsequent European strategy. His promised accelerated results had failed to materialize, and the board was asking difficult questions about how a key executive had been allowed to leave and establish a competing advisory firm in such a critical market. As for me, I was just getting started. NH Global Advisors had expanded to a team of 5, with plans to double by year-end. Our client list included some of Europe's most respected family-owned businesses, and our reputation for managing cross-cultural integrations with integrity was growing weekly. I never lost sight of what truly mattered in international business, not the quick deal or the splashy announcement, but the patient building of trust across languages, cultures, and traditions. It was this understanding that Caleb, and ultimately Meridian, had failed to value, and what now formed the foundation of my success. I hadn't lost anything in the end. I'd simply found my true beginning.